Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Cullen, and I'm the Acting Director of the Susan B. Anthony Centre at the University of Rochester. Our centre works to bring awareness to and to advocate for social justice and equality. We work in collaboration with the university community and partner with a wide range of local, national, and international organisations to fulfil our goal of translating research into policy. We would like to welcome you to our panel discussion, Housing Injustice in a Pandemic, and express our sincere thanks to our panelists and moderator for agreeing to participate. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and you may type your comments and questions in the chat box. As we begin, I would like to share just a PowerPoint and offer a land acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, known as the Great Hill People and keepers of the Western Door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers on whose ancestral lands the University of Rochester now stands. And before we start, I would just like to share one more bit of information about a related event that's coming up next week on Friday, April the 2nd at noon. It's at the University of Rochester Medical Centre's Public Health Grand Rounds. We'll host a panel on housing and health in a pandemic, a public health perspective on Rochester's looming eviction crisis. And don't worry about scrambling to write all of that down. We will add the information in the chat box. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today. And that is Miss Mary Lupien, City of Rochester Council Member and Champion for Affordable Housing. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Miss Lupien. Thank you.
And thank you so much. And thank you to the Susan B. Anthony for hosting this important event. I am going to be the moderator today, and I just wanted to give a little overview of the format. We're going to have 3 speakers today, and each will be giving 10-minute presentations, and followed by a Q&A, which I will be picking questions out of the chat that follow, themes that were coming up or important issues to highlight, and posing them to each of the panelists. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelist who will go first, Mary Leo. She's the Executive Director of the Housing Council of Pathstone, whose mission is to increase successful homeownership and tenancy experiences for low to moderate income residents. Mary, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be with you all. So yes, I was excited to receive an invitation on this topic, but especially from the Susan B. Anthony Center. I don't know if everybody can see, but I keep her above me, watching over the work that we do here at the Housing Council. The Housing Council is celebrating 50 years, and out of those 50 years, we've really worked to address this exact topic, address the inequities in our community that cause social injustice stemming from housing inequities. And we've done that through a series of programs that have evolved over the years. But this year, as everybody has, we've had to adjust to the new inequities and disparities our community has faced new increased levels of due to the COVID pandemic. So be happy to share what the Housing Council is doing in partnership with our community to talk a little bit about how we hope to help in the short term and what some of our long-term output and goals will be for the community. So first, we do know that Rochester has been a community that's historically been known to have affordable housing prices. And typically when we think about that, it's around ownership. But our rental markets have really gone unaddressed for quite some time. And to me, when we talk about affordable housing, we also need to talk about quality affordable housing. Just because prices have historically been low in our community, that doesn't mean it's meeting the needs of our most vulnerable populations. So here at the Housing Council, we host a housing hotline, which allows folks from the community to call us 9 to 1, Monday through Friday, with their basic tenants' rights questions. Small business landlords reach out to us all the time with general questions. And then we try to supplement the work and the conversations we have on that hotline with continuing services for our small business landlords, which provide most of what would be deemed affordable housing in our community. We really work with them to improve their business practices, and we've seen them very hard hit during this time. A recent survey shows that about 25% of tenants in Rochester were behind on their rent payments in March. And so if you do the math, that's almost 26,000 households that are at risk of being evicted once the moratoriums are lifted. So we are working through our Landlord Ambassador program to support the small business landlords who are facing and dealing with rental delinquencies, and also making sure the tenants who have been, had reduced income or other hardships over the last several months are getting connected to the resources that both the city and the county are offering through rental support programs. Pretty soon you'll be seeing a mass mailing and radio ads and other media that are advertising the resources that can assist tenants and landlords in accessing rental delinquency supplements through what's being called the EPI 2.0 program. It's the second iteration of rental support that will be available to the community. Lots of lessons were learned in the first version of the program, and we're looking forward to sharing that as a resource in the community. For the first time, landlords will be able to initiate the process with their tenants' approval in cooperation, and we really hope to support the community in understanding what that resource is, because in the short term, this pending eviction crisis is our #1 priority to continue to support low to moderate income families, stabilize their housing, and be able to maintain their health both financially and physically as we continue to fight the repercussions of this pandemic. So here at the Housing Council, we try to be as accessible as possible. So I mentioned both our hotline, where we try to answer quick, immediate concerns and questions, and then link the community to resources that are evolving or have folks may not be aware of to ensure continued health and success. So for us, that's something we definitely have our eye on, and I really want to make sure that we can highlight what's happening in our community over the next couple of weeks, and new programs that will, I hope you all hear about soon, and help us connect those in need to the services that are available. I also wanted to mention some of the questions that were posed to this panel are looking beyond the pandemic, and I can't wait till we can officially say we're beyond the pandemic. It's hard to say when that will be, but we do know beyond the immediate health concerns our community members have, there's going to continue to be impact to our housing markets, kind of in tandem with the spur of increased rise in COVID. Housing prices have continued to increase. So we know those who currently have ownership, either through a private residence or in an investment property, have actually seen their wealth increase, while the barriers to becoming an owner, either as a landlord or a first-time homebuyer, have increased as well. And we're working to address those concerns for small business landlords and first-time homebuyers. The barriers to becoming an owner are higher than they've ever been, but the importance of having local investment has increased, because we know that's the #1 way that we can help the community gain wealth and long-term stability. So we are adapting our first-time homebuyer program and expanding the resources for folks who are interested in becoming local landlords, to make sure that they understand the rights and responsibilities those important tools include. We want to see people maintain property once they become owners, and see the benefits of growing and building wealth, to see Rochester prosper beyond our immediate concerns around the eviction crisis, but that we can continue to address quality housing and affordability long-term. So I'd be happy to address any of the services that we offer in the Q&A portion of today, or if people want more information about particular services that we're offering, both short-term and long-term, on the topics that we addressed during the panel.
That's great, Mary. Thank you so much. And I'll just take a point of privilege here. Just wondering if you could speak a little bit about why the barriers to homeownership are as high as they are right now.
Yes, so I think most of you have heard that housing inventory is very low. If you hadn't. We're at historical lows, and we have a lot of first-time home buyers very interested in purchasing. So anecdotally, it seems that the folks that we are talking to were relatively untouched by the by the COVID pandemic. Maybe they were able to maintain remote work, were not impacted financially, and because they've been spending so much time at home, are very eager to move on and buy a home to continue on. So they are financially strong, they're stable, and they're competing with lots of people in a similar position. But the amount of inventory we have has not increased, and materials and the cost of developing new housing has increased. So it's really putting a lot of pressure on everybody who's out there shopping. And because of that, prices are increasing drastically. So our ability to assist first-time home buyers who have maybe stable income but are on the lower income side, we usually use tools associated with down payment assistance and to overcome the barriers associated with low income and shopping at a lower purchase price. Those tools we're seeing being less impactful because with low inventory, sellers are not interested in a first-time buyer's offer if it's tied with other grants or special programs because they have a variety of cash offers to choose from. And so that's creating one of the major barriers for people who want to become owners is this lack of inventory increases prices, and the tools that we've traditionally had at our disposal are not equipped to deal with the pressure is what we've been seeing the last few months. So it's definitely been a struggle.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Next, we have Adrienne Neal. Adrienne is Associate Counsel for Rochester City School District and a member of the Rochester Black Bar Association. Adrienne helped form their partnership with Volunteer Legal Services to assist unrepresented litigants with landlord-tenant issues. Adrienne, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'd like to say, well said, Ms. Leo, in those points you just made. As you said, my name is Adrienne Neal. I'm an attorney with the Rochester City School District. I'm also a member of the Rochester Black Bar Association, the RBBA. And I'm really here in that capacity today. The RBBA was founded in 1994 by attorneys of color to articulate and promote the needs of attorneys of color and effectuate needed changes in our community. The mission of the RBBA is really, among other things, to advance equity of African-American lawyers, to promote ethical standards and practice of law, to provide a network of support to lawyers. But there's an important part of the mission statement as well, which is, to promote, speak for, and advance the causes of civil and human rights. And that's really what brings me here today to talk about that and the volunteer program the RBBA is involved in with the Volunteer Legal Services Project. We're really the champions, of this thing who do the day-to-day heavy lifting. So why are we involved and how do we find ourselves in this situation? Well, with an overall poverty rate of 31%, Rochester is third on the list of 10 poorest U.S. metro areas. Black children in our area are more than 4 times as likely as whites to live in poverty. Median household incomes of African Americans in this area are less than half of whites. Both African Americans and Latinos are less than half as likely to own their own homes. And these are all statistics, that are widely available in our community, from entities like RMAPI and RECF. I start with those facts. It's always important to start a conversation with facts. The dictionary defines a fact as a piece of information presented as having an objective reality. And the objective reality is that we live in a community and a greater society with a serious and blatant inequities. And the housing crisis is a manifestation of that. There is, in looking at this material, there's a quote by a gentleman, Mr. John Taylor, and he's president and chief executive of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, who really kind of studies these things in depth. And he said, I think most people believe the problem is not with the rules, but with the people. Most middle-class whites in America don't have empirical observations of what happens in underserved neighborhoods or understand the historical treatment of poor and minority communities. And I find that to be truthful and very profound. And it speaks to the notion that a lot of people have, that the Black and brown people and the very poor kind of put themselves in the bad situations that we're in today due to the lack of hard work and initiative. Of course, hard work is important, but the genesis of where we find ourselves, particularly for Black and brown people, really goes back a long ways It's not happenstance, bad luck, or even accidental. It's really through a lot of intentional actions that were engineered and sanctioned by our own governments and institutions. And therefore, it's kind of up to, and on our laws, and it's really up to, our government and our lawyers and those institutions to fix those issues. Some of the historical tools that are well known, for example, redlining, goes back to the 1930s, and it refers to the boundaries that the federal government used in maps and mortgage reviews. And they would categorize Black neighborhoods as a D for hazardous. So there's this whole grading scoring system. And those neighborhoods, of course, had a majority of people of color, and they were given the lowest grades. And loans in these neighborhoods were unavailable or very expensive. So low and minority peoples could not afford homes. The Federal Housing Administration, again, another agency created by our government, ironically, in part to solve the problem back in the 30s that America was a nation of renters. And it worked because homeownership really kind of increased, drastically between the late the 30s to the 70s, from around 44% to 60+% by some metrics. But it benefited people who were 90% white. So it's those things are not surprising, considering, again, there's information in the FHA manuals that neighborhoods needed to remain, mostly, white in order to, to kind of maintain what the government thought our country should look like. Another tool, a legal tool that was really widely used, racial covenants. These were agreements entered into, with property owners, developers, really binding them not to sell, lease, rent, or convey property to specified groups or races or peoples. And racial covenants were a widely enforced tool. If the covenant was broken, you could sue to enforce it. And again, the federal government was right there, along with the states. In the FHA manual back in the late 30s, it said to be most effective, deed restrictions should be imposed upon all land in immediate environment. They recommended that restrictions should include provisions for prohibition of occupancies of properties except by the race for which they're intended. And this really kind of continued until the late 60s, around 1968, where the Federal Fair Housing Act stepped in. And again, these tools are not rare. They were widely used in our area by some of our most powerful people and institutions. They were advertised and promoted very widely. And the kind of the last legal tool I'll talk about that was widely used were exclusionary, like zoning laws, right? So these were rules that allow towns to block efforts to create apartments, affordable housing in certain communities. So you have, a concentrated poverty in certain neighborhoods. And of course, zoning tools and laws, continue to be used in this way today. So why do I, kind of go through all this? Again, there's I think it's the Tempest Shakespeare said the past is prologue. And so once you understand that there's a direct line from the past to the present. And some of the information that again is out there and widely reported on by the NCRC indicated that nearly 2/3 of neighborhoods deemed hazardous back in the 1930s, by these maps drawn by the federal government, are still inhabited by mostly minority residents, typically Black and Latino, where adversely 91% of the areas classified as best in the 1930s remain middle to upper class, and 85% are predominantly white. So there's a wealth of data that shows that housing in both ownership and rental, that stability increases positive effects for neighborhoods. I work for a school district. I understand how important it is for children, for families to have stability. But the effects of the policies that we talked about are that, and again, this is a quote I'll take from Mr. Taylor. It's created a permanent underclass that's disproportionately minority. And again, these things, in case we think these things are relics of the past, as recently as a few years ago, New York State alleged in 2013 that one of the largest banks operating in Rochester market had a map defining its lending area that included much of the Rochester area except except the city or predominantly minority suburban neighborhoods. And until 2013, any residential mortgage secured with property outside that lending area was labeled undesirable. So again, these things are still continuing. And so fast forward to the landscape in New York today, we're in the midst of COVID-19. As I discussed, we kind of created a permanent underclass that can't afford homes or can't afford rent. As Ms. Leo indicated, by some statistics, 60% of Rochester's housing markets are rentals. We have some information from the courts that indicated that between 5,000 to 9,000 households are behind on rent. And by the way, this also affects landlords, right? You have a lot of landlords who rental income is their primary means of income. New York State took some action back in March of 2020. The governor signed an executive order 202.8 placing a moratorium on evictions through June of that year. And through administrative order, they extended that through August. They put some things in place that placed moratoriums on evictions, so long as the non-payment of rent was by someone that was eligible for unemployment insurance or benefits. And there were some subsequent court orders that extended that really through this month. VLSP really kind of stepped in last year and began to work on the influx of new filings to determine how best to support the community. And something novel, by the way, is happening in Monroe County. There's something called the Special COVID Intervention Part. And this was created, it's a collaboration between the VLSP, the Legal Aid Society, Legal Assistance of Western New York, city, community agencies. I'm sure Mr. Miller is aware of this. And the goal of that is to efficiently and kind of cohesively handle the anticipated backlog and the high volume of the landlord-tenant eviction matters that we expect to see really starting this month, and those folks who are in need of assistance due to COVID-19. And it just facilitates the linkage of government and the non-profit entities with the community groups. It's designed such that all the tenants and respondents will have the opportunity to connect with volunteer counsel and meet with service agencies to address financial issues. For the reasons I've kind of laid forth, that's why the RBBA is involved. It was also personal, personal and profound for many of us. In the midst of the COVID crisis, George Floyd was killed right in front of our eyes. And for many Americans and really the world, it was a seminal moment because it focused everyone's attention with a laser-like focus on racial issues and the inequities that are reality for Black and Brown people. And it spurred this wave of activism, and we really wanted to do something that would have lasting meaning and impact. But we recognize that one of the ways that a part of racial justice is economic justice, and particularly over the last year with the COVID crisis, there's also a financial crisis, and we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel for this the health crisis, but we're just seeing we believe we're seeing the tip of the iceberg of the financial fallout. And we really don't want people to be victimized multiple times. So, they've been victimized by history. They've been victimized by COVID. We don't want them to be victimized by homelessness. And as attorneys and legal professionals, we're very fortunate, and we're in a unique position and have unique abilities to help our community, to help our society. Really, that's why we got involved. I want to give a few pieces of information about VLSP and the participation in the SCIP program. So the VLSP, they run a tenant hotline. This is Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Tenants will receive court papers and notices from their landlords. Questions can call into the hotline. They provide legal advice and information after completing an intake. VLSP, through their volunteers, assist tenants with lease negotiations and anything that they need. You have volunteers, like myself, who show up to court, who show up to court or make phone calls or whatever we need to do to some of those clients who need representation. I think it's also important to add that the VLSP, Volunteer Legal Services Project, is not doing this alone. They're part of a group called the Tenant Defense Project, and it's a jointly run pilot project by various legal services providers in the community, and it includes VLSP, Legal Assistance of Western New York Law, New York, the Legal Aid Society. It is funded in part by the City of Rochester and Monroe County. And looking at some of the numbers, there were a lot of litigants, even with a moratorium, that they were helping. Between October 2020 and January 2021, the hotline took in almost 2,000 calls. They made over almost 300 referrals. They spend a lot of money on these issues. The Legal Aid Society 1920 annual report indicated that their housing and consumer law unit had operating expenses of just over $730,000. These organizations need our help. So I really encourage, especially if you're a legal practitioner, to volunteer. You do not have to be an expert in the area. This is not my primary area of practice. I'm not an expert, but there's trainings. There's trainings that you can take and to become competent. When you show up to court to help these folks, or you make a call, they're so appreciative, because again, this can be a daunting area, even if you're an attorney. So imagine how the tenants feel when they show up there. Court is scary. There are also, and I'm probably getting to the end of my time here. There's also a lot of right to counsel initiatives, and I think people should pay attention to that. Outside of the criminal, outside of criminal proceedings, there's really no right to counsel for litigants. There's guardian ad litems, and where the court can appoint something if you're a minor or incapacitated, but there's really a push, really kind of statewide, and discussions about and making sure tenants have a right to counsel. And again, SCIP is doing that in part, but it might require and probably will require some legislation to make sure that tenants have a right to counsel.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I can speak for City Council that we, created a pilot for right to counsel, where some of the federal money that was coming through because of COVID, we were able to provide some of the legal agencies with more funding to staff up to handle the amount of cases coming through, and that we're considering legislation to be able to make sure that that right to counsel is guaranteed. And thank you so much for bringing up the historical racist policies and practices that existed 50, 80 years ago that really have come to a head right now, and it's the real reason that we're seeing so much need in housing in the Black community and in communities of color. Thank you. Last, to round us out, we have Dana Miller, Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development for the City of Rochester. Dana oversees programs that aim to provide every resident with safe, quality, and affordable housing, create more jobs, and bring vitality to city neighborhoods. Dana, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Council Member. I appreciate your generous introduction and the time that we have to spend here. Although the time is short, we'll try to make good use of it. I am, as Mary said, Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development, which includes all of the housing development that takes place in the city with the city's auspices. It also includes the real estate division, which handles any real estate sales or transfers of city property, and also includes economic development. So what I want to talk about is really three things. I'd like to talk to you about increasing incomes. I'd like to talk to you about increasing housing, and I'd like to talk to you about decreasing homelessness. Those three things I was asked to talk a little bit about policy, and those are all related to policies that have been in place. Adrian talked very eloquently about some of the past policies that have left us in, unfortunately, the situation that we find ourselves in today. But when we talk about housing, we actually did a housing market study back in 2017. And, you know, if you took that whole 100-page study and netted it out to one thing, it actually ties back to something that Mary said. The housing market study said we don't really have a housing cost problem. We have an income problem in Rochester. Our people in Rochester are underpaid relative to what it takes to actually have a place to live. And so from a policy standpoint, one of the very important policies that's underway right now is the $15 minimum wage. Obviously, people are talking about that. The state has committed to that. The minimum wage has increased steadily since that was put in place and is currently at $12.50. But in many places now, $15 has become essentially the new minimum. Rochester Regional Health announced that they will move everyone to $15 if they're below that by July. Fast food workers will reach $15 by the end of 2021. And, you know, that is very helpful, but we have to also recognize that a person earning that wage, even if working full time, is going to make $30,000 a year. And they don't get to take home that $30,000. They get to earn that $30,000 and they take home less than that. That's just 40% of the area-wide median income for a four-person family. So even getting to $15 doesn't really solve the problem. So the other thing that we need to think about is how can people increase their income? And the simplest way to do that is by having multiple incomes. So there are some creative things that folks have done around the country and around the world. One thing that we've looked into and heard about is something called mommunes, where a couple of moms get together and actually share a house, share child raising duties, and essentially you double the income. Co-housing is another thing that we've looked into. There's a local co-housing group that has talked about creating units where multiple families can live together with a shared cooking and living area, but with separate units that people would live in and therefore share the cost of housing. And the other thing is just simple multiple incomes, whether by marriage or by relationship or generational sharing. Having two adults in the household both earning and sharing duties, responsibilities can, you know, perhaps make a big difference. We know that there is a huge difference when we look at the income of a family of four, a huge difference between two adults and two children or one adult and three children. So, you know, those are policy kinds of things that we should be looking at, trying to encourage. The second thing is increasing housing. Now, there are some state policies and some county policies and some city policies that will increase housing. But from a state standpoint, you know, our governor has recently started a $20 billion 5-year plan that's called the Housing and Homelessness Plan, which is intended to build or preserve more than 100,000 affordable homes and create 6,000 with supportive services. So that's an important step to increasing the housing opportunities. From a county standpoint, if you've had a chance to look at the recently released race report, you'll notice that it mentions the county prominently because of a very important issue that we're all pretty aware of, which is that most of the affordable housing is concentrated within the city of Rochester. And that's a challenge for a couple of reasons. One, it creates concentrated poverty, which we know is more difficult to deal with than separated poverty. But it also prevents people from having access to better school opportunities, from other kinds of opportunities that might be available if that affordable housing was more spread throughout our county, which has a high number of folks who need affordable housing. So Adrian talked about some of the restrictions of the past, and we no longer have restrictive covenants. You can't write into the deed of a house that this house can't be sold to a person of color or a, you know, you can't do that anymore. And even if you did, and even if those still exist, and many do, they're not enforceable. But there are other things like minimum lot sizes and zoning methods that still prevent affordable housing from being built in many areas. That's a challenge because every town and every village gets to set their own rules. The county doesn't have the ability to establish one rule across the county. So you're dealing with individual small local governments that would have to really think hard about how to do this. It's also very difficult, and I sit on the board of the Greater Rochester Housing Partnership. It's very difficult to get approval to build affordable housing in any suburb unless it's senior adult housing. You can get approval for that, but housing for families that's affordable is almost impossible to get. So we have to look at those policies. And from the city standpoint, we have done a lot with our policies to try and encourage and increase the amount of affordable housing. Any development that receives any city support, if we contribute any money to it, if we provide the land for it, if we provide a pilot agreement, a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, that development has to include 20% affordable units. So if someone wants to build a 100-unit building on the inner loop, that's great. We're encouraging that. We're doing a lot to have people build housing. But if they say, well, we want a 100-unit of that's going to be market rate housing, that's great too. We need market rate housing. We need housing diversity. But if they're going to build that 100-unit building with any city support, 20 of those units will have to be affordable. And that we've been enforcing that strictly on all new units that are built in the city. Since 2014, since Mayor Warren took office, we've invested more than $719 million in affordable units. There have been 3,626 new affordable units built and completed, and there are another 700 plus in process right now. There was a comment in the original write-up that said, well, we're not building affordable units, but we keep building luxury units. That's not entirely true. We've built more than 3,600 affordable units. There have been 1,675 market rate units built. So with the new units that are created in affordable and with the 700 in the works, it's more than double the number of affordable units compared to market rate units. Some of those you obviously have seen, and some of those are in the works and you might not have seen, but at the corner of Joseph Avenue and Clifford Avenue, 164 new units will be starting and have already started, $48 million development. Inner Loop 2, 103 new units. They're all affordable, $30 million project. Inner Loop 3, 66 new units, 26 affordable, 20 moderate income, and 20 are for supportive housing. A $20 million project, a new unit that was just created, actually two separate units, one on Jefferson Avenue and one on Hudson Avenue, the Jefferson Wallensack project, 50 new units, all affordable. So there's a lot of affordable housing underway. One really exciting program that the Urban League is doing is 41 new single family homes that are affordable. They're being built in scattered sites. Currently, it's called L2P, or lease to purchase. And with the L2P program, those 41 new units, currently it's west side, so they're all being built on the west side of the city, primarily in the 19th Ward, in the 11th Ward, and I think possibly a couple in the 3rd Ward. But these are 41 new houses that will be affordable houses. They're available to be rented, and they're rented for the 15 years that it takes to recover the construction cost. And then at that point, the tenant who's in the house at year 16 has the ability to purchase the house for no more than what the rent cost was. So it becomes an owner-occupied house at that point and goes on from there. So a way to get people into houses that might not have had a way to get into there otherwise. And the last point I wanted to make was really about decreasing homelessness. So, this was touched on by Mary, and she's absolutely right. A lot of money has been spent. We had more than $10 million allocated to the city for eviction prevention through the CARES Act, the program that Mary mentioned, EPI, or Eviction Prevention Pilot Initiative. We called that 1.0 because it was the first one. That assisted more than 1,700 tenants with emergency rent assistance and a total of $4.3 million in rent payments. But as Mary said, it gets better because in 2021, we have more than $11.4 million for what we're kind of calling EPI 2.0. And that includes improvements, as was stated, to allow the landlords to apply for the assistance along with the cooperation of the tenants, but allows the landlords to apply. This was one of the real concerns we heard the last time, that landlords were saying, well, I have tenants, they can't pay, but they're not willing to go through all of the paperwork or are having difficulty getting through the paperwork. This allows the landlord and the tenant jointly to complete the paperwork. And in addition, rather than just allowing 6 months of rental assistance in arrears, this will allow 12 months assistance, and will also allow 3 months forward assistance, so that if you have a tenant who hasn't paid for 12 months or couldn't pay for 12 months, they can receive assistance, and can also receive assistance for 3 months going forward if they still will not be able to pay. So, we really need to find ways to make sure that this eviction bubble that we know is coming actually doesn't come to pass, that we can intervene and collect and connect those folks to make sure that they, my timer is going off here, sorry. So that we can get those folks the assistance that they need, so that they do not end up being evicted. Eviction helps no one. It does not help the tenant. It does not help the landlord. It does not help the community. So those are the 3 points I wanted to touch on, and I know there's going to be a lot of question and answers. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and this has been a great session so far.
Thank you, Dana. I really enjoyed listening to all 3 of our speakers, and I'm looking forward to some of the questions which are already flying in. So I will be, like I said, condensing questions that I see some common themes and posing questions to our panelists. One of the first ones that came in has to do about reparations. So Catherine writes, Evanston, Illinois has announced a reparations program for people of color affected by racist housing practices that Adrian talked about. And it will be funded by a 3% tax on marijuana, and wondering if there is a movement for reparations in Rochester. Would anyone like to take that question?
I've heard of that, and I know that there is some work that is being done within the government, within the city government anyway, to look at how, if there is money that comes from the tax on cannabis or marijuana, that money would be able to be used for something that would be beneficial to residents. I don't know if there's a specific policy that's being looked at right now that would be called quote unquote reparations. And if that was the case, it would be something that would come through through our legislative body, through Mary and her colleagues.
Yes, I can speak to some of these questions also from a city council perspective. And I will say that there were 2 members of the RAISE Commission that submitted an opinion that they thought there should be a money set aside to a community chest to provide reparations. So I do know, at least from the community, that there is a movement for reparations. Mary or Adrian, would you like to comment on that question before we move on?
Again, I think Mr. Miller's right. That's really something for our governmental legislatures to decide. The government, and our institutions help put us in this situation, so they will have to help get us out of it. I am all in favor of whatever you want to call it, if funding to help keep people in their homes. So you call it whatever you want, but as long as there's a resource and there's funding to help keep people in their homes and keep them stable.
I'll just mention that I also am a member of RMAPB's Public Policy Committee, and it's definitely something we're advocating for, that communities of color that were disproportionately affected by laws, criminal laws around marijuana use. And that's a very important topic that's being looked at from an advocacy standpoint. That's more so on the criminal justice side of the house, and I'm more so on the housing side of the house, but I would echo what Adrian and Dana shared, that we want to see people brought back up with resources to the communities that have been disproportionately affected by the mistakes of our past, the crimes of our past.
Thank you. There's a few questions in the chat around small landlords. Are we concerned about small landlords, you know, they're being an important part of maintaining housing in Rochester? There's a statistic that 82% of affordable housing in Rochester is provided by these private landlords. So I know we talked about some of you talked about that in your presentations, but wondering if there's any other thoughts that you have on it, or places where people can go first.
I'd like to say I really appreciate some of the points Dana made earlier around this issue. We at the Housing Council do have the Landlord Ambassador Program. We have an operating rental property course, and we know that beyond missing out on rents, there's been other damage done to our small business landlords, and the ability of folks who want to become landlords haven't had those same opportunities. So I would just like to reiterate the services that we have, and that we are working with new partners who are very invested in making our small business landlords whole and making local investment more attractive and more accessible. We want to ensure that local residents are providing housing, and we can reduce the total amount of out-of-town investment and try to increase active, engaged landlords, make sure they have the resources they need in maintaining their property, growing their business, and providing such a vital service to our community, especially those who are low to moderate income. Being a landlord is a lot of work. It takes a lot of strength and knowledge, and there's been a lot of changes to the laws around providing rental housing through the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. So many of us are still trying to get caught up to what those new laws mean for the community. And we are doing our best to educate and provide the resources, and are developing new resources to ensure we don't lose small business landlords. It's a vital part of our community and our ability to maintain affordable housing, which I know there's questions about too. How do we actually define affordable? It's a big question.
I'd like to, I saw that Mary put a very detailed and an excellent answer to that, which explains what the different levels are: extremely low, very low, low, and moderate. There was a follow-up question: what ratios are the developers expected to meet? So just to be clear, when a developer is building a development and they receive any city assistance, they are required to provide 20% of the units that are affordable at 60% or below of the area-wide median income. So that's approximately $40,000 a year, 60% of AMI, and the units have to be affordable, meaning that people earning that much would not have to spend more than 30% of their income on the housing. So those are the rules that we are asking developers to abide by. And our city council has been very clear that they will have a very, very difficult time approving city spending on projects that do not meet that level of affordability. So.
Thank you. Dana, you touched on the housing market study that talked about wages being depressed, and that being one of the major reasons that we have the housing crisis that we have. In other cities, we see some evidence that rents rise faster than wages, and also some talk about pinning a minimum wage to kind of the rise in the cost of living. And I just wanted to kind of set that basis to ask the question about how our panelists feel about some of the tenant protections that some of our advocates are asking for as another way to provide affordable, to maintain affordable housing for renters, in addition to also targeting increasing wages.
I'd be happy to start. We at the Housing Council had to literally rewrite the books on a lot of our materials when the Tenant Protection Act passed in 2019. We definitely support that. We want to see more protection for tenants to have stability, more so to mirror the same protections that homeowners have in our judicial process when facing foreclosure. So we definitely support the need for increased proper notice, more stability for long-term tenants. But we also are balancing the feedback that we hear from small business landlords, trying to come up to speed on those protections. So having stability mechanisms and legal protections for tenants is crucial. As it was mentioned before, eviction is expensive for all parties involved. Eviction isn't caused by poverty, but eviction causes poverty as well. It's very expensive once you've been removed from a unit to get back into a unit safely. And the limits that the new law put on security deposit, first month's rent, and upfront costs that a landlord can expect when a tenant is trying to get into new housing, those were important because it was very expensive for somebody to climb back up the ladder after one bad month, one mishap, when you're living on a razor's edge, when your budget is so close that one mistake could to launch you into homelessness, and the cycle that that causes, and the expense to both us as the community and the expense that is created within that family and the trauma that's created. So it is something we're adjusting to. And I think the balance comes from supporting those small business landlords doing their best to understand and prevent a housing crisis. But those protections are important, and we need to create greater stability and reduce the number of overall protections while making being a landlord economically feasible, and making sure that the tools are there for folks to do well.
Yeah, I just want to build on Mary's points that are all exactly right on and are excellent. But we had Matthew Desmond here a year or two ago, who wrote the book Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. And yeah, there it is right there. So if you want to order a copy. But when Matthew came here and talked about his book, one of the things that he mentioned, which was very, very troubling, is that in many cases, one emergency situation in a family of no more than $150 can start a domino effect of issues that end up with that person being evicted. And he told the story of a woman who her sister died and they needed $150 for the funeral expenses, and she did that rather than paying the rent. And just the sequence of events that happened is very traumatic. And unfortunately, many of our families are living that close to the edge, where you hit something and bust your car tire, and you can't get the tire fixed, and then you can't get to work, and then you lose your job, and then you end up being evicted because you didn't have $100 to get the tire fixed. I mean, we are really challenged in many ways with finding ways to create or help people create some kind of an emergency fund. And I know that there are a number of organizations that are looking at that. I think ESL is looking at that, and some others in creating some kind of an account that would match some of the funding that the people are contributing themselves to create this emergency fund that would be accessible in circumstances that deem it necessary. So things like that are important things that we need to look at. And the other point I wanted to make about our landlords, who, as I've attended some of the landlord organization meetings, they've actually started to move away from that term, and some are saying we'd rather be called housing providers than landlords. The landlord has an unfortunate connotation that goes back, in history. So we can use whatever term. People are entitled to decide what term they want to be referred to by. But as we look at them and as we've talked with them, they presented the information, and then, as we discussed that, concluded that yes, if we took all of them together as an entity, they are in fact the largest business in our city. Collectively, they have more work that's going on than, some of the larger companies here. So it's an important industry that we need to make sure is able to be successful in the long run. So, the change in EPI that allows landlords or housing providers to fill out the paperwork is a very important step, because it then allows that to really proceed in a much more streamlined way than the older process, and we can get people paid more quickly. Because if you do have 1 unit or 2 units or 3 units, you're not this stereotypical person who's sitting back and just collecting all this money. The costs are very high to operate these units.
And I just add, I mean, I echo everything Mary and Dana said. And we do have to be very nuanced when we talk about, landlord-tenant issues. There's some data that came out from the city of Rochester and last year, and it was showing that the average amount of non-payment claims were filed were about 1,500, which represented 2 months' rent, and that smaller landlords were twice as likely to file for eviction. So these are folks who than larger landlords when you get to 20 or more units. So these are folks who rely on the income for their livelihood, and they shouldn't necessarily have to bear the entire burden, because our government or society has failed. So the solution has to include them, and it should include them. And in regards from the legal standpoint, Tenants Council, I believe, was involved in forming the skip court, and so they have so far been part of the solution.
Thank you. We got a question in the chat around the need for more public housing. It's something that we haven't really talked about yet in this conversation. And Dana, maybe I'll throw that one to you.
Well, I just saw the question pop up, and it is a good question. Obviously, Rochester Housing Authority is a very, very large housing provider in the city of Rochester. We work very closely with RHA. They are always looking at increasing the number of units they have, but their main challenge is that many of their units are older units that need substantial amounts of renovation, and so their funding typically is being used to renovate the old units as opposed to building new units. And as a result, the private market has kind of stepped in and really looked at ways to build more affordability. It is a venture that is profitable if done correctly. And so we're seeing, where we had 7 parcels on the inner loop, and everybody said, oh my gosh, you're going to get all this high-end housing, and you're never going to see any affordability there. And as it turns out, the majority of the units that are being built on the inner loop are affordable housing. So we've had developers. We had one developer who proposed market rate housing development and then came back to us and said, we've looked at the market, we've looked at what's happening in Tower 280, we've looked at what's happening in the Metropolitan and some of the high rises downtown, and we're seeing a softening in the market for the high-end units, and we're going to switch this development, these 103 units, from market rate to affordable. So there is evidence that the need for these market rate units is perhaps softening a bit, and the need for the affordable units is strong.
Thank you so much. I just want to mention before we wrap up, we also didn't really touch on displacement that's happening due to gentrification. And actually today at 4:30, City Council has a work session digging into the Harvard study called Gentrification and Affordable Housing in Rochester. And you can find that on our YouTube channel, City Council's YouTube channel. So it is 1 o'clock. Thank you so much for allowing me to moderate this panel. And I really enjoyed hearing everyone's answers, and I'll turn it back over to John.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was very informative and thought-provoking panel. Unfortunately, we have to stop the conversation. We know folks have other places to be. I'd like to wrap up with, again, thanking our panelists and moderator for this session, which again thought was extremely informative. I'd also like to thank Catherine Farrow, our Assistant Director at the Susan B. Anthony Centre, who really was behind the scenes logistics in organizing this. Please feel free to follow us on social media. And this webinar panel has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel probably by next week. And we do plan to have further events like this in the coming months. So with that, we wish you all well and thank everyone very much for attending. Thank you.